entry of these essentials for non-musicians or non-singers, we are having one of the most interesting and one of the most misunderstood terms, which is harmonics. I have read and heard maybe the worst atrocities, if not hallucinations, coming from very well-known singers, very well-known active or non-active musicians, orchestra directors, or critics, or anybody who claims to know about it. Truth is that I have found most of them really don't know what they are talking about, and I thought it would be a good topic to cover as our last topic in Essentials, provided the huge number of comments and articles and times that it is mentioned in interviews. And as I was telling you, truly it seems that 80% out of the people who talk about it really don't know what they are talking about when they speak of the voice and its harmonics. So, for that purpose, let me bring you back, because this is going to be very important. Let me bring you back to our. We need to say goodbye to this guy here, to the Excel we prepared for most of the entries, because the one that we started first is the one that is going to help us more today. Just a reminder that we built the notes around the octaves in an ascending way, and we added the frequency to each of the notes, and also we mapped the difference. That is going to be absolutely important, because I also mentioned you that this guy here is not, and this is the very, very important part, the increments among each of the notes, we are going to read it later in the presentation, the increments among them is not linear. That is going to be super, 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 super important. So keep that in mind, because we are going to talk about it. And I am going to give you an example that covers part of the range of the voices that are mapped here. So enough for the introduction. Let's get started. And for that purpose, we are going to start talking about something that I want to call the voice print model. I am pretty sure, because at this point you may be wondering what is it, why is it called the voice print? Everybody is aware of what a fingerprint is. You know that these dudes that we have in our fingers happen to be unique. There are no two people with equal fingerprints. And our prints being that unique define us, and that's pretty much what we are talking to when we refer to the voice. In the case of our fingerprints, there is this tissue that has been formed on the surface on the skin and that defines us. We are going to talk about, in the case of the voice, of the many waves, of the many frequencies, of the many sounds that are the components of the voice. So first things first, keep in mind that the voice is made, has as we are, I'm going to say it very clearly, we are so ignorant in terms of the voice that at this point we are unable to tell how many components, how many audio signals, audio waves, audio sounds are the typical component of a voice. We are even unable to map them. We can't say if it is five, six, seven, 100, 1,000. We don't know. All we know is that our voice, the human voice, is made of many, many, many pieces of many, many frequencies that all together make what we perceive that uniqueness of the voice. And now that I have mentioned that, we are going to use this small now in horizontal presentation, because Excel I had shown you was in vertical presentation, vertical ascending with the octaves ascending, and now we have the octaves and they are moving. As maybe you won't be able to see it that clearly, but we are starting on the left with the second octave and we are growing up to the right to the seventh octave, starting on the C and ending on the B. So that's pretty much what it looks like. It is going to be helpful for a reason that you are about to see. So when you say that a person is singing a C um, or a Do, what you're saying is that you perceive that a sound wave is being emitted with that frequency. Okay? When you speak of a Do or a Si, you're speaking of the frequency of that wave. That wave, when we say, because the Si bemol of the tenor, the high C of the tenor, the E flat of Maria Callas, and etc., we are speaking of the fundamental wave. Keep that in mind. That is super important. Whenever you refer to a note, the notes we have been reading on the score, we are referring to the fundamental. But remember that I said that the voice print has as many components that we humans have been unable to map them how many they really are. And among those components, and coming from the theory in physics, I was telling you that in fact the sound waves are nothing but a case of mechanical waves that propagate in a medium, which happens to be the air. So that means that it follows all the rules. That is super important. Whoever tells you something that challenges the nature of what we know of physics is much more an ignorant rather than somebody who claims to know a lot. Because all waves, and that is super important, all mechanical waves, at least in our reality, the reality we all know, all waves have a fundamental sound, which is the one that we actually recognize as the pitch. Again, when you say, the tenor had a beautiful high C, you're referring to the fundamental. The soprano sang an E flat, you're referring to the fundamental. But based on that theory of mechanical waves, we know that all waves have harmonics. That is pretty important. All waves have harmonics. And how far are the harmonics extending to the right, meaning extending to higher frequencies? How many are there? They are infinite in number. So when a person tells you that a given voice has more harmonics than the other, he really doesn't know what he's talking about. All fundamental, all the speaking or referring to the pitch, the original pitch or the fundamental is going to have a first harmonic. There is a formula for getting this. So for music theory or people who already know about music, and it is supposed that nobody who reads music is watching this video because this is for essential for people who don't know it. They know it by like, the multiplication table. Just, that 7 by 8 is 56, right? But you just keep the 56 even if you don't know where that 56 came from. That the same thing happens with musicians. They know that the first harmonic of a given note, and they know what that's going to be. In our case, it's going to be, if we started in C3, you read it this way, we have a C3 as a fundamental voice. Calculations, it's calculations that bring us to that the first harmonic it's a C4. Based on those same calculations, we know that the second harmonic happens to be a G4. And this is where it matters. And before I forget, notice that even though that that the grid here, it has the same width, it is not the same width. Truth is that from the E to the F and from the B to the C, it is a semitone, because remember that we have tones and semitones. And there are two that have semitones instead of a complete tone, from the Mi to the Fa and from the Si to the Do. That's why it is mapped differently. So based on the frequency, we know that the second harmonic has a G. What does that mean? That whenever you listen to a C3, It will always produce. Whoever tells you differently, I insist, doesn't know anything about physics. Anybody singing a C3 is going to produce immediately without any intervention because we are unable to control them. Well, some singing school techniques try to work with the harmonics. We will get there. But any sound that is produced in a C3 will have a first harmonic in a C4 and the second harmonic in a G4. To provide a further example, we will go for the harmonic 3. Running calculations, the following harmonic 3, will be a C5. And just stopping there, notice that by our the voice, any physical instrument as it is our throat, producing a C3, and just stopping here at harmonic 3, we will have this same behavior moving ahead to the right to the infinite. That again is very, very, very important. All waves produce harmonics that calculations lead us to the infinite. Okay, we are just stopping here because I don't want to get you into much trouble. So, what is the message that I would like you to carry in your minds? That whoever sings voice or instrument a C3, its three first harmonics will be a C4, a G4, and a C5. I am going to refer also to the height of these waves. This is called, well, in terms of physics, this is the amplitude. This is what we in everyday terms call the volume. This is the volume of the fundamental. So can the fundamental of the C3, it's the highest value, the most solid, in fact, that we hear, and the harmonics tend to have a different behavior. They are not exact copies of the fundamental. So keep that in mind as well. Now, I was telling you that what we hear now, my voice that you are listening to now, what gives this uniqueness, what turns it into a voice print, is that it has many, many, many other components. Even if I am singing a ah, there are going to be many other sounds being produced around that when they say that it is clearer or I like it more when we talk about the voice of the baritones and the basses because they have at least in male voices that's where you can hear the many other components that a voice can have because you listen to all what we perceive as the texture of the voice is are not only the harmonics of the fundamental but those other side components that the voice has. So assuming that we have a component around the E, and it could be very close to the F because the components, we don't have any control over the other components of the voice. The same way you don't have any control over your fingerprint, you don't have any other direct influence over the components of the voice. What singing schools try to do is to work on the other components to a certain extent to make them suitable to the taste of our perception of what music is. All the other components is what lead us to say, oh, this is a horrible voice because it doesn't match my the standards that I have for the beauty of the expected sound of a voice. Or we say, wow, that is a very beautiful voice. That is because all the other components, and I insist, we are unable as humans with our understanding now, we are unable to tell how many components each voice has. We know we have other components besides the fundamental, but we are unable to map how many of them. However, there are voices who have been gifted and have all those components that are harmonic to the fundamental tone, which make those voices sound very beautiful. There are others that don't have it, and singing schools try to work on those things that were given to make them sound better, but we don't have full or even clear control over those because they are made on empiric knowledge. They are based on empiric knowledge. Many people know that there are other sounds happening around the fundamental, but are unable to understand what's the nature of that. So you know that even if you have two different instruments playing the same note, they will all sound different. They will all sound different because of these dudes in green here, because of all their components. So what I wanted to tell you is that component one, following the rules of physics, is going to have a harmonic, again, because all mechanical waves behave the same, will have another harmonic, and its first harmonic will fall if you have if your component one is an E3, it will have its first harmonic in an E4. Calculations lead us to understand that its second harmonic will be a B4. And calculations run us to understand that the third harmonic is going to be an E5. Also, as we did with the fundamental, we are stopping after three harmonics because remember they extend to the infinite. And I entered just these two because notice that by just mapping the fundamental and one of the components and its first three harmonics, the graphic starts to look a little messy. And that's because I insist when you say, the tenor sang a beautiful high C. We are not listening just to the fundamental, but to the sum of all the other sounds that are the harmonics of the fundamental, the components, and the harmonics of the components. So we are not listening to just one sound. We are listening to a full, complete, complex range of sounds, and that's what I am calling the voice print. That's what makes the uniqueness of the sound. I am also saying that it is very important because there are other things that you need to consider. I am mapping a component to a higher note. In this case, if we were supposed to be singing a C3, and we think that we have a component one in E3, let's just keep in mind that those all those ranges of frequencies when we speak are also produced to the left, which means not all the notes produced by our voice are not all the components produced by our voice are higher than the fundamental. We also have waves that are lower in pitch to the fundamental. So if we enter calculations for this component, then we have for the first three harmonics of the lower components compared to the pitch, we would have three more on this graph. And that's why I was telling you that it starts getting complicated. And that's why there are so many people working on analyzing these sounds. But so far with what we covered, we understood the basics. We always have the fundamental, which is what we call the pitch. We mapped three of its harmonics. We understood at least one of the components. You can run this exercise for as many components we thought we could have, maybe five, maybe eight, maybe 10. I insist we are unable to tell how many components each of the voices has, but let's pretend we have 10. So multiply this awath. If each of the components has four waves here and we are stopping at five, just think that you multiply it and you add another 36 waves in the same space. That would be the if the voice had only 10 components additional to the fundamental. That's what you would have as your voice print, and that would really be the map of your voice, not only the fundamental, your beautiful C3. Okay, so I think I forgot to tell you that today's video is going to be way more complicated than the previous entries that we had. So moving on. Now, you understood that there are components that are lower in pitch and there are components that are higher in pitch to the fundamental. And any wave that is mapped here, any of these waves has harmonics running up to the infinite. So that's because the formula that comes from physics indicates the harmonics run to infinite. But, before we forget, there is another term. This is infinite for the harmonics, but there is another term that are called the subharmonics. So if this wasn't enough, complex enough, there are other components that are produced by mechanical waves and that are called subharmonics. Thanks God. They do not run to the infinite because they are uh, fractions of the unit. So you run a fraction of your fundamental, let's say a half, and you get that fundamental, the quarter, and you get that that subharmonic. We would start mapping now to the left, but I didn't want to make it more complex on the screen, and that's why I left it there. But keep in your mind that there are other subharmonics to the left that are not even mapped here. Okay, so fundamental, infinite number of harmonics, unknown number of components, and also with an infinite number of harmonics. And we have components to the higher in pitch than the fundamental, and we have components lower to the pitch that are on the left of the graph. And besides that, we also have subharmonics, which fortunately are not infinite, but are also there. So there is something that there are 4 points that I want to state with you that I have been repeating and repeating and repeating. One, all voices have a fundamental. I would change voices because instruments do as well. As I was telling you, any any object in our physical reality that produces a mechanical wave has the same behavior. Only I am narrowing it down to voices. So all voices have the fundamental pros, the n components. N is unknown. We don't know how many components each of the voices or each of the human voices has. All of them have their own harmonics that run to the infinite. All the voices have a fundamental of n components, and all of them have also their own subharmonics. So this graph would be so cluttered with waves that it basically becomes impossible to read. But that would be actually your print, your voice print. Number three is very important. The perceived sound of a voice is the mechanical capacity of the auditive system to catch these frequencies and amplitudes and provide them to the brain. So, we all know, of course, that the medium we have, the transducer, the physical transducer that we have in our body is the hearing that starts with the outside ear. All it does is it transforms the compression of the air that is what is producing the sound, and it's turned into an electrical sound that our brain can decode into such sounds. But here is the trick. Not all the auditive systems are in perfect conditions. And this is why I have been telling you very often in the podcast episodes and in the other entries that I even find it ridiculous when people say that a given pitch or a given note or anything is perfect as if they were an electronic device that can provide proof of what they are saying. Because the same way not all voices are equal, are the same. So we not none of us has the same voice as any other human on earth. The same way our hearing, unless you have run an audiometry test and you are 100% sure of the sensitivity of your hearing throughout the whole audible spectrum, unless you have run such tests, you are completely unable to tell that you listen to all the sounds in the orchestra perfectly. Because habits such as listening to high notes very often, such as whistles, may hurt your hearing, and as such, your ear may be unable to read notes or to hear notes in the range. I'm just putting it as an example. Maybe you have been affected, and the whole eighth octave you are unable to hear correctly because your hearing is damaged. Or you are listening to low sounds very often. You work in a place where, I don't know, there are turbines or anything like that, or gas pumps or anything like that, and now the impact you have it in the lower in the lower octaves. So unless you have been run a complete audiometry test, you are unable to tell that your hearing capacity is perfect. So many people, when they listen to a singer, they catch immediately when they have what we call the squillo, and many people are unable to perceive it. And it is because it doesn't mean that the singer doesn't have it. It means that you are unable to perceive it. Okay? And I really advise you to take a listening on audiometry test because that would be very important. And the fourth is a conclusion that is related to the three previous one. Our hearing capacity runs from 20 to 20,000 hertz. Seth, Seth. If you run that audiometry test, you will notice that most people start losing the lower and the upper register in hearing. So, what does that mean? If harmonics run to the infinite, they perfectly go over 20,000 hertz and beyond. You are unable to listen to many of the harmonics because of the limitations of your hearings. And even if you had a perfect hearing, which could be around the 20,000 or 20k hertz, our that means that the harmonics are infinite, but our hearing is just this. We are just listening to a piece of the voice because we are not only limited in the frequency that runs to the infinite, we are also limited, our hearing is limited to the intensity of the sounds or the amplitude in physical terms. Which means if we are unable to hear the whole range and we are unable to hear all the volumes, we are even if we are able to map them with electronic devices, it doesn't mean that we are able, our own hearing system or auditive system is able to perceive all the sounds that machines, that devices are going to map. So why am I saying this? Because again, there's way too many people saying, because she or he has a beautiful sound in here and there, but it doesn't mean that the singer really has it. It could be, and many times it is because the person who attended or who listened to that singer has a deviation or a problem in listening to certain amplitudes or to a certain range of frequencies. Now, also, this is very important. Sound engineers add filters to eliminate undesired frequencies and enhance weak ones. As a consequence, the voice is manipulated. And this is the explanation why singers and recordings sound different in live. So imagine that Ricardo has a very ugly sound. Let's suppose it is this orange wave here. Ricardo has a horrible sound natural to his voice. Ricardo has nothing to do with it. And he has gone through many singing teachers and he's unable to get rid of this wave in orange and all its harmonics and subharmonics. What does the sound engineer do? They add what is called a filter. And so he eliminates the orange. And this is exactly, by the way, what many softwares do so that the singers sound in pitch. uh, so they eliminate this sound so that the voice of Ricardo sounds well. All the orange eliminates in the audible range, and so people think that it's the voice of Ricardo. But the time you go to Ricardo's presentation, you notice this sound that was not present in the recordings. and they do also the opposite. It turns out that Ricardo has a very beautiful sound in the beautiful sounds in the first part of the fourth octave. So what does the engineer do? He adds, he enhances, increments the sounds where he sounds well. So they are taking away the orange ones where he sounds horrible and enhancing, amplifying the places where he sounds well. So you end up listening to a voice that it sounds appears to be more beautiful than it actually is. But this is the origin, or this is the source where this all comes from, which is the understanding of the fundamental, the components, and the harmonics that come with it. You can target and say, Ricardo has a horrible metallic sound around the uh, eighth octave, which means one of its harmonics sounds way too much. Since it doesn't pass well to the recording, I'm just going to cut it. And when you attend the presentation of him, you say, what's that metallic sound that I didn't hear in his recording? Well, that's what it is. Reality, a singer singing live, of course, will always give you the reality of what his voice actually is. Now, I also wanted to tell you, because I didn't want you to forget, I told you at the beginning, but keep it in mind that the graph is according to the increments of tones and semitones, this grid. And remember, this is not linear. This is why it appears that the space between each of the harmonics that does not seem to be stable. These three seem to be closer together than the fundamental. But it is because remember that the frequency changes because it is based on a formula that is related to mathematical calculations. If you don't remember that wave, please go back to the first videos and you will see when I notice, I put it on the screen for a couple of seconds because I mapped it using Excel so that you could see that it is in fact a curve instead of a linear increment. Okay, so we are getting to the ending of this, don't worry. Uh, just not to forget that the amplitude or volume that we see now on the upper left, it's what we perceive of the volume. That you can say, oh, what is the fortissimo? That is the height or the amplitude of the sound. And what is the pianissimo? Ah, because it's much lower in sound in terms of amplitude of the wave. So I think if you can understand what we have on the screen now, then you are pretty much done. You are in much better conditions for understanding what harmonics are, how they run to the infinite, the components that higher in pitch and the components lower in pitch, and the existence of subharmonics and the range of the human hearing. And that, before I forget, that also happens with in the past with the tapes. Analog tapes had a sensitivity of frequencies the same way our hearing has, and it's a little different for the digital recordings. It has to do with the response of the microphone because that's the first transducer, but I might explain it later or somewhere else because for the non-essential for essentials for non-musicians, non-singers, I think this is way too much. Okay, so uh, but I don't want to keep it just in words. I would like to invite you, if you feel like it, you can always have on your computer or in your cell phone, you can always download an app. And if you're a singer, studying singer, you already, or musician, you already have it. Because I want to share with you what it looks like. This is a screenshot from a program that I have in my computer because I wanted to prove you that this is not just theory. Look at this. Ricardo was singing I See 4. This was the fundamental. The one we had in green, our first fundamental, our example was a C3, but in real life I sang a C4. When I sang this C4, we knew that the first harmonic was going to be a C5. You remember? And that the second harmonic was going to be a G5. I didn't enter the arrow because it was going to be look overcrowded coming from here. But you have the fundamental is the C4, its first harmonic, the C5. The system read the existence of the harmonic at G5 and the third harmonic at C6. So it is not just theory invention. By having a microphone and a program, you can actually read it. And by the way, you notice that we also have a baby here, an A3. What is that A3 doing there? Is that a component lowering pitch? What is that, baby? That's one of the things that I was telling you. The whole voice range has way too many components. But with this example, I am proving that if you sing a C4, you sing that C dot ah, you sing that note, and that immediately the harmonics will appear. You don't need to do anything. The harmonics will appear with different amplitudes, of course, with some other changes, of course, with other frequencies. Otherwise, it wouldn't be harmonics. But that happens because nature works that way. So whenever you listen to another person who is said to know at harmonics and say that if you place your voice in a certain way, your voice will produce more harmonics, I can tell you that he's lying and that he doesn't know anything about physics. No matter how you place anything, you will always produce harmonics that extend to the infinite. What he's referring to is certainly something else. But it is impossible that by placing your voice in a given way, for the imposta, as we call it in singing, it is impossible that by just placing your organs in a certain way, you are going to produce more or less harmonics. Harmonics start with the first harmonic and then in the infinite. They are referring to a different characteristic, which is not the number of harmonics. You can have you can have a sense of what they are really talking about, but I am not going to answer that question now. So, and last but not least, I would like to invite all musicians and singers, and if you're watching this video, we were saying you are neither a musician or a singer, a professional singer. I would like you to invite I would like to invite you to understand the scientific side of these mechanical waves that we call sound. It is imperative that everybody understand it because on the internet, really, there are way too many misunderstandings, hallucinations, aberrations that even professional singers or musicians say or critics do or write that have nothing to do with reality. Guys, we have enough progress. We have instruments as easy as our uh, mobiles, which are computers, by the way. If you think your uh, mobile phone is just a phone, you have to know that you basically have pretty, a fairly well advanced computer at hand, and that can lead you not only to study and understand, but run your own tests. Don't let anybody. And the next time I read another comment on harmonics, I will send you back to this video because I would call this basic understanding of music. Harmonics are part of the most important